Hi, you're listening to After Dinner Conversations, short stories for long discussions. What that means is we get short stories, we select those short stories, and then we discuss them specifically about the ethics and the morality of the choices the characters and the situations put us in. Why did you do this? What makes you do this? What makes us good people? What's the nature of truth, goodness, all of that sort of stuff. And hopefully we're all better, smarter people for it and learn a little bit about why we think the way we think. So thank you for listening. Hi, and welcome back once again to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. I am your co-host, Colby, here with...
Hi, I'm Ashley.
And across the internet...
Hi, I'm Sarah.
There you go. And just a couple of quick admin things to get out of the way before Sarah gets started with our wonderful story. We now have 2 anthologies out. We've got this podcast that's been going for a while. Please like and subscribe. But more importantly, the magazine has been out for a little while now. And we are available on different platforms. So you can get it through Amazon as individual copies, or you can subscribe via our website and get it delivered to you every month to your inbox, as well as through, there's a couple of different apps now that carry us. Magster, Issue, Redly. I think there's some other ones coming online too. Probably they will be online by the time this comes along. So do you want to go ahead and do the introduction for our story?
All right, so this story is entitled The Mind Reader by John Doble?
I will go with that.
Doble, yeah. Okay. So, let's see. So this story opens up with 2 men in a bar having beers and conversation. And I guess there's a preamble to this where the narrator is talking about how he thinks about this incident often. So it's kind of like
it's like a 20 years later, 30 years later, because it takes place in the 70s. Okay,
yeah, so
it.
This is like a memory that he's having. So now he's retelling the story that comes to his mind often in all kinds of scenarios. Early in the story, we kind of learn that the relationship's a little unequal. The narrator is always caught a bit off guard by his companion, who's named Jeffrey, and he's trying to placate or impress his friend often. They get into an argument over a question on what's called...
So the narrator is the guy remembering it, and the friend in the bar is named Jeffrey.
Yeah, I don't think we ever get the narrator's name, right?
When I read it, I thought the narrator was a female.
Oh, God, that didn't even occur to me.
I did.
Why would a guy and a girl be sitting in a bar in the 70s?
It didn't occur to me either.
Maybe.
I read it as a female perspective.
Okay.
As a narrator.
It'll be interesting to hear what you think. Okay, that's interesting.
I was just calling this person the narrator.
Okay.
I like it.
And then their companion is Jeffrey.
Okay, we'll go with that.
So they kind of get into an argument over what's called the F scale. So this is a test that is used to rate how likely someone is to have an authoritarian personality. So this test is a series of 30 statements, and the subject must respond on the range of strongly agree to strongly disagree. They are statements like, some people are born with an urge to jump from high places.
I thought it was 5. I thought it was 5 statements, not 30.
It's 30.
It's 30? Oh, okay. That actually makes
30 statements.
That makes me think maybe it's a slightly more better test. Okay, sorry. I thought it was 5. I was like, why would you know it? Like, I must have misread it. Like, I remember thinking, like, how can you know all this about a person in 5 stupid questions? But okay, 30 makes it sound a little bit better.
No, it's 30, and I looked up a couple of tests, and they're all the same statements.
Okay, I did look up the tests, too, and that's why I couldn't figure out why the tests online were 30, but the story said 5. I must have just misread. Sorry. I'm just going to keep interrupting you like this the whole time, but keep going.
No, that's okay.
They actually, I'm reading it right now in the story. It says the test consists of only 5 questions.
Oh, interesting.
Boom.
So
That's
you were
okay.
right.
That's okay.
So in the story, they say 5 questions, but in reality...
But online, it's 30.
It's 30 questions consistently across the different... Whatever, forms of this test. So
I took the test too, did you?
I did.
Yeah, okay, we'll talk about that later.
Okay. So the statements are things like... some people are born with an urge to jump from high places, and you either strongly agree or there's like a range. You can choose a range between strongly agree and strongly disagree. And then they go to like higher risk statements like homosexuals are no better than criminals and ought to be severely punished. Strongly agree to strongly disagree. So you kind of get you have to take stances, on different
Okay.
statements. Okay. So at
And
the end of
based
the
on
test,
this, you can somehow figure out if you're a fascist.
yeah, you get
or-
a score that says how likely you'd be to fall in line with an authoritarian leader.
Okay, cool. Not if you're a good
So
or bad
it's-
person, just like
Yeah.
here are your tendencies.
And it's not just like authoritarian. You are an authoritarian leader or a fascist leader. How likely you would be to follow somebody like that.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
And I think that's important in the story too.
Okay.
Do you want to know what my score was?
Sure. I don't remember what my score was, but I did take the test. But let's hear.
I'm 11% less likely to be an authoritarian than the average person.
Okay. All right, we'll go with that.
The test is mind-blowing. It's kind of weird. Anyway,
All right.
so
I remember it being sounding very like old 50s, 60s questions.
yes.
Like there were things that like
totally.
now you'd have to rewrite it for now to like make it more relevant to like modern things, it seems like. But at any rate.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know about. Yeah, we could talk about that.
All right. Please continue what happens in the story. though. We'll
Okay,
finish that
so
part
the
first.
summary. So the statement that Jeffrey decides to argue about was people can be divided into the weak and the strong. That's the statement he kind of fixates on, and he's really
And
angry
that was one of the
about
questions
this.
on the test.
It is one of the questions on the test, and he
Okay.
feels like he agrees with that statement, but the statement does not make him an authoritarian, and he
Okay.
thinks that this test is getting rid of or ignores what he calls human complexity.
Okay.
So he decides to show the narrator how wrong he is, and he does this by choosing a girl from the bar, one he describes as looking like she has just been raped. And she tests her, or he tests her by first writing "I know" on a scrap of paper and dropping it by her foot.
Okay.
And when she picks up the paper, reads it, and brings it back to him, the game kind of begins, where he's asking her questions or kind of baiting her in a way. So it ends with him telling her to go home and clean herself up. Look in the mirror and see what you've made out of yourself, and then come back.
Because
And
she's all disheveled and druggy looking, as I recall.
Yeah,
Or at least according
right.
to him.
According to him, and she looks
Okay.
depressed or high on drugs, or the narrator describes her as having like scraggly hair and clothes that look like she's just picked up out of an alley and just put
Right.
on.
And this is 1973, so that's vaguely like the fashion of the day.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So she goes home, she comes back, and she offers to sit with them and talk with them. It's almost like flirtatious in a way.
Yeah.
And she kind of sends these signals that she'd be willing to go further, and Jeffrey kind of declines and sends her away, but he sends her away with this, like, now you have learned something, like he's some sort of prophet.
Yeah.
And she kind of treats him in that manner as
Yeah.
she's walking away. She's like, oh, you're right, I have learned, and kind of wanders off. And the two men, or the two people, Jeffrey and the narrator, leave, and the narrator actually compliments Jeffrey, and Jeffrey asks him, how far would you have let it go? Implying that the narrator was also duped in this game.
Which also means that the narrator probably ranks high on the fascist scale because he was willing to watch things happen and not do anything about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the narrator confronts him and tells him that he needs help, to which Jeffrey responds, I know.
Which is like his
And that-
phrase he keeps repeating back in the story to the girl all the
Yes.
time. Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting, too, because it
Yeah.
relates to another story. But the narrator basically wraps it up by saying he never sees Jeffrey again. He does everything he can to not see this person again.
But like 30 years later, still remembers the whole conversation. And so all right, before we get
Yeah.
too far into it, I just want to ask you all, do you think this story was real? Like it reads like with a level of detail that seems like it was really a memory that some like 50 or 60-year-old had and they wrote this story down. And if
I
that's not the
agree.
case, then kudos to the writer for being amazing.
It seemed so real in terms of the ease of the conversation and how it kind of all plays out. It didn't read like I was reading a short story. It read like someone was telling a story, like a memory.
Yeah. Sarah, do you agree? Do you think it's a memory or that this guy wrote down? Like I don't want to say I don't want to say a memory, but maybe like a creative fiction. Like it's based on a true creative nonfiction. I mean, based on a real thing that happened, or do you think this author just totally made this up?
I think it was completely made up. I found the whole scenario completely implausible.
Okay, that's good to know. That's cool.
But I can see where you're coming from. That's why I'm kind of like
There's just there are
I'm
little
trying to like put myself in that mindset.
There are a few details that I feel like the name of the bar, right? Like I feel like those are the kind of things that if you're making up a story, you tend to just skip over and be like, well, it's any bar. And if you're telling a story that's personal to you, you have to like make sure that the person knows it's that bar.
Okay.
That's what that. But it's not. But the story itself, you could certainly argue, seems, it all runs very smoothly. It runs very like clockwork in a way,
Right.
which makes it seem a little bit less plausible.
I would like to bring up one detail that really hit for me when you were going over the synopsis was when he kind of baits this girl, not really giving her any information, but just baiting her with questions for her to open up. And he basically crushes her dream to move out west for a search of a new life. And he didn't do anything in terms of intentionally trying to manipulate her, but having her come to that realization, like he was like a mind reader, or like basically in one instant, like with not even knowing that person, he crushed her dream. Like within like 10 seconds was like, yeah, and what are you going to do there?
And did it on a bet.
No, you're not. And then she was like, oh, you're right. And I was like, wow. That's quite a manipulation there. That for me was more of a turning point than her going home and getting changed, because he already broke her prior to that by crushing her dream to move out west.
Have you ever heard of Barnum statements?
Mm-mm.
So people who are psychics.
Yeah.
Psychics in air quotes.
Yeah, psychics in air quotes
Yeah.
use these statements. They're general statements that feel specific to the listener.
Oh,
And
like
what they
someone,
do is they
like someone
entice-
loved you and broke your heart.
Yes, they entice
Yeah.
the listener to give up information so that then the person who's kind of committing the quote unquote psychic is going to use the information they volunteer.
Yeah, seems like that's what he's doing in the story for sure.
Yes, exactly. And so when he's scanning the bar to look for her, he finds a mark. Like, this person looks suggestible.
Yeah.
So it's not only just the fact that so for me it was getting information about her, which was the baiting, like and then she sits by him and sees how flexible she is in terms of being able to be manipulated. And then he crushes her dreams, and then he also redirects her to do an action, to go home, change up herself, and then come back. So not only was this a like, how much can I get someone under my control? I mean, he literally like changed her future in a way of what she was wanting to do. She's not going to go out west. She's going to go home. She's going to get changed. So I don't know. I just felt like that was pretty big.
And that's where there was kind of an eye-rolling moment with that for me, because I was like, oh my goodness, is this seriously a makeover story? Like, he got her to go home and pretty herself up.
Well, he also, I think part of it, that she didn't put on makeup, she said. He said she just, like, put on clean clothes and, like, maybe took a shower.
She did her hair. Yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't like whatever those, like, Disney movies are, where, like, the cool Can't Buy Me Love or whatever, one of those old school, like, I'm going to make you the cool kid movies. It wasn't like that. You think it was? Sarah, you sound like you've got a lot you've been waiting to say on this story, so let's hear it.
No, I don't.
So the fact that she comes back and she asks to sit by him, and yet he dismisses her yet again, he would have kept playing with her. He would have kept slandering her. She would keep coming back. He would redirect her to do something else, and she would go do it. Then she would come back. He would, like, I don't know. I just felt like he could have kept repeating that cycle with her for days.
And that's what I think his point was. Like, watch me do this. Watch how easy it is to get control over somebody. And I think that Jeffrey knows he already has control over the narrator, because he already has this kind of off-kilter relationship where he's keeping the narrator on their toes all the time. They're going between placating him and challenging him because they think that's what he wants.
Sure.
So Jeffrey's already kind of got this power over the person telling the story, and then he demonstrates using this complete stranger how easy it is to get that power over somebody that you've never even met before.
It makes me wonder about their relationship, because here's this accomplished, person at school studying and knows a lot about psychology, yet when actually challenged about his confidence around Jeffrey, he kind of crumbles. And I think he puts a lot of credit to Jeffrey because he's been through war and he's such a strong person. I wonder if there's certain characteristics that he envies about Jeffrey that makes him bend. That he's like, oh, I can never be like you. I'm going to second guess myself in a way. I just feel like their relationship's very complex. Because this person obviously knows a lot about and tries to defend himself over and over again, and he just lets kind of Jeffrey stomp over him. And yet he kind of raises him on a pedestal because he's a war veteran and a Purple Heart and has a messed up hand. And
so do you think that the reason that the sort of the manipulative ability of Jeffrey is different in the case of the woman versus in the case of the narrator? That in the case of the narrator, he's being manipulated because he sees his status as an injured war veteran, and he gives him that power because of that occupation, as opposed to the woman, who's just sort of, low self-esteem, looking for herself, and so it's the same result but totally different reasons.
You could take someone that is down in the dumps, depressed, lost, and you can also take someone who's an accomplished, like they talked about in the beginning, you have these scientists who worked for Nazi Germany, they were the head of their game and humanitarian, and yet they could be tricked. And this is a perfect example of that. He takes a girl who's down in the dumps, a low life, if you will, and yet he also can manipulate this high-end academic at the same time. He has kind of the control over both of them.
But doesn't that kind of go to the point, and Sarah, I want to jump in here in a sec here, but doesn't that kind of go to the point of the very thing that the point that Jeffrey's trying to make is that you've got this 5 or 20 question F scale to show are people weak or strong? And he's like, no, it's more complicated than that. It's more nuanced. So I feel like the point he was trying to make in the story was you can't necessarily rate people on how likely they are to fall in line with an authoritarian person, because everyone, given the right manipulation, will fall in line with an authoritarian person. And let me give you an example right now. That's sort of what I took from it. But including you, the narrator, you don't even know it. Maybe for a different reason, maybe in a different way. But it's not a 40% success rate in Germany, right? It's a 99% success rate in Germany.
So do you think that was the author's purpose, to talk about how anybody would fall in line with this?
I think so. First off, I'll speaking for myself, I think this was probably 80% a true story. I think it was sort of maybe 90% a true story. I think it was sort of a creative nonfiction, but I could be wrong. And I think the thing that the narrator learned 30 years later in life that made him write the story, and the reason that this story is stuck with him, is he was studying psychology from a clinical standpoint, feeling that you could rate people on some scale, and that this one experience in his life taught him that basically anyone can be manipulated to do anything, with a few exceptions, given the right speaker, given the right narration, given the right sort of manipulation. And maybe it's easy and maybe it's hard, and maybe you're the first one to step in line and maybe you're the last one to step in line. But I think the twist at the end is the narrator was explaining all of this as if it was happening to a weak person. And what you realize is it can also happen to what he views through his own bias as a strong person.
That's
how could this happen to me, the one who's actually studying psychology?
Right, I'm the girl
who knows everything that there is to know. You can't trick me. I know how the magic trick goes.
Hi, this is Colby, and you are listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. But you already knew that, didn't you? If you'd like to support what we do at After Dinner Conversation, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/After Dinner Conversation. That's right, for as little as $5 a month, you can support thoughtful conversations like the one you're listening to. And as an added incentive for being a Patreon supporter, you'll get early access to new short stories and ad-free podcasts, meaning you'll never have to listen to this blurb again. At higher levels of support, you'll be able to vote on which short stories become podcast discussions, and you'll even be able to submit questions for us to discuss during these podcasts. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being the kind of person that supports thoughtful discussion.
How could this happen to me, the one who's actually studying psychology?
Right, like I'm the girl.
Who knows everything that there is to know. You can't trick me. I know how the magic trick goes. And it's like, no, you can be played too.
It's sort of like I imagine, I'm trying to think of the name of it, the Dunn-Kruger thing, where it's like there's a tendency for people who know a little bit to think that they know a lot. And for people that know, it's like a scale of how much you know versus how much you think you know. And in the beginning, if you know nothing, you think you know nothing. And if you know a little bit, you think you know a lot. And then later, when you know a lot, you realize you only know some, right? And so the people that are most likely to have the most confidence in their opinions are the ones that are in that sort of like sketch middle zone that really don't know enough yet. And I feel like that's the thing that he's demonstrating about himself as a narrator, is he thinks he's a smart psychology student. And what he's realizing is it's not about being weak and strong. It's about just humanity is subject to manipulation, whether you are weak or strong. That's what I took from it. But it's just one opinion, right? So I'm curious to hear what you thought, Sarah. It sounds like when you came into this, you sounded like you had a lot you wanted to say, and now you've quieted it down about it.
I'm just listening to you guys talk.
Okay.
So what do you think that says about Jeffrey? He does not know a lot, but he is really confident.
He is I read him as a threat because he knows how to play the game.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
He knows how to play the game. He's proven it time and time again, at least to himself, and he uses his weaknesses towards his advantage, like the fact that he's seen as a veteran and the crippled hand. I was very much threatened by him, and the fact that he acknowledges that he has this quote unquote power over people or this ability to manipulate, and he's like, yeah, I know. And it's like, dude,
okay.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Like,
so the I know thing. You know the story of the snake?
Mm-mm.
No.
Let's hear it.
So there's a snake and it's freezing on the ground, and this woman comes by and she picks up the snake and she takes it in and warms it and heals it, and then the snake bites her, and she says, "Why did you bite me? I saved your life." And the snake says, "You knew what I was." I think that snake story is woven in here because he says, "I know." When the narrator confronts Jeffrey at the very end of the story, and he looks and he says, "I know," then I think that Jeffrey is the snake. But the thing is, the snake story is often used by xenophobic leaders to discourage refugees from being allowed into their countries. Certain
interesting.
people used it during the 2016 campaign at their rallies.
So it's interesting. So I've heard that story before, but I've always taken it, maybe this is just because I'm not particularly xenophobic, I always took it to mean that that don't expect something to be anything but what it is.
Right.
Like,
and I think that maybe that's how this little allegory was written, but it's been used in this other way.
Okay.
And I think that this particular story might have been written from a perspective that's like, hey, look at this, because this is also reminding me of this thing that I've seen going around the internet a little bit about a teacher in a classroom full of students, and the students are watching a video, and they're supposed to be taking notes on the video. And on the teacher calls out one student, like, Tommy, you're not taking notes. And Tommy says, like, of course I'm taking notes. Like, look at the notes I'm taking. And the teacher's like, no, you're clearly not taking notes. And he's just, like, really writing this kid, and then sends him to the principal's office to go get in trouble. So the teacher takes the kid out to the principal's office. Kid is clearly getting in trouble. Teacher comes in and looks at all the other students and says, none of you did anything. You see how easy it is to just watch somebody be falsely accused and targeted and bullied. So
Wow.
it was
I hope
like
they were
that
watching.
story.
I hope they were watching a video about Nazi Germany when she did that experiment.
I think that's the background for the story.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if this is a real story, but I've seen a few people kind of share it,
That's
like on
interesting.
social media. And so I thought of that story, and then the snake story kind of came to me through a friend. And
Okay.
it was like, oh, both of those stories are kind of in this one.
So that's actually really scary, because in an instance like that with the teacher, personally, I wouldn't have the guts to stand up to the teacher. That's a person of authority. If it was
Right.
a peer
F scale.
that was bullying, I would have been like, hey, that's wrong. But yeah, if it's a person of, like, quote unquote authority, especially as a child, I guess even now, well, no, now that I'm an adult, not really. No one really.
But
holds
practically
that over
nobody
me.
does. Like, they've run all these tests, and it's the thing about with the shocking the person in the other side of the room for getting the questions wrong. All those. I mean, very, very, very few people will say no to a person in a white lab coat, right? Or say no to a person wearing, like, a red construction crew vest, or a doctor, or a teacher, or, like, it's just so ingrained in us. Or in the case of a politician, like a leader, right? Like you just, it's a cultural thing that we just, like, we defer to authority.
Right. So this veteran has some sort of authority because of his status as a veteran, and an injured veteran at that, with a terrible story to share about how he got his injury. And so he looks at the narrator and says, trust me. He tries to say that this girl deserves it.
Yeah.
Right? She's weak. Clearly, she's suggestible, so she deserves this.
Or the
I
path
promise
that she's leading is not correct.
Right.
She deserves to be
Helped.
punished,
Messed
or
with.
helped, or, yeah.
Yeah. And I won't hurt her. No harm is going to come to her.
Yeah.
And then he says, don't say anything. If this is going to work, you can't say anything. And no matter how bad it gets, the narrator says nothing.
Yeah.
And then he says, how far would you have let it go? Like, why did you take my authority? So I told you to say nothing. So you just said nothing?
Right.
At what
Well,
point
at what point did he actually, so imagine this happening in, like, real time. Did he actually do anything to her that was crossing a line? I mean, all he did was drop a piece of paper that says, I know. Is that, like, where do you draw that line of him, like, crossing the line with her?
The whole interaction between the two of them was incredibly abusive. It was awful. Like, he should never have interacted with a strange woman that way. And especially since he was intentionally targeting her because she seemed vulnerable.
Yeah.
So he was crossing also, but he didn't cross certain lines, so he didn't take her home. So I guess that's supposed to make it all okay.
All right, so I'm just going to play the guy's role in
And
this.
I think that would be the narrator's, like, way of rationalizing not stopping him earlier. He's like, well, he didn't touch her. He didn't hurt her. He didn't say anything.
He did, though. He
like...
stroked her. Remember at the end?
Oh, yeah, that was... Oh, that was weird. I forgot about that. Yeah, he, like, touches
and she,
her
like,
face.
kisses his hand.
Yeah,
she
that's
kisses his
creepy.
hand before he sends
like the
her
wounded
off.
hand.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, she's changed forever. That is the strangest part.
Yeah.
I think there's something there about, like, cult leaders too.
It was very cult. It was very cult leadery. It was very. And I think that's also appropriate for the 70s, right? It's a very. You can see how a person who understands that people work this way, the way Jeffrey understands it, how, like, he's doing a horrible thing, but he's not terribly malicious. Like, he's proving a point. and I think in an altruistic way, I think he's proving a point. He's proving a point to the narrator, like, look, don't hold yourself or people in the way that you think you do, because it's not that simple. But there are people that have the same knowledge and the same way that they act, who are, purely capitalistic or purely cultish or purely, sex-driven or whatever the case may be. And so while you guys are really quick to slam Jeffrey, I feel like Jeffrey was using something that he knows to illustrate a point, as opposed to like going through life being horrible. Now, I'm not saying that he isn't also horrible. Maybe he is, and that's just not part of the story we get. But I don't know.
It's probably
Like,
not the point of this story. Like, Jeffrey's
Right.
character is not really his larger personality is not the point of this story. I think the
Yeah.
author is trying to get at this, like, hopefully anti-fascist message.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let me see what we've got in the way of questions here. Although we usually get to most of them.
Oh, what was your F scale score? What were your findings?
I don't.
So we know Sarah's not susceptible or prone to.
Well, I mean, so it seems, right?
so it
Yeah.
seems.
So it seems. I don't recall. The thing I recall from taking the test is I recall taking the test and thinking to myself, I'm going to score higher than I think I am, because everyone is more susceptible to this than they think they are.
Well, the questions they ask you are pretty leading, too.
Yeah, I think so. I took the test after I initially read it to publish it, so it was like 8 weeks ago now, 10 weeks ago.
Okay.
So I don't remember. It's sort of like when people ask someone like, hey, how racist do you think you are? Like, whatever your answer is, you are more than that. Like, you can't have grown up watching the news and television and reading newspapers and living in America without being racist. And the first step in the process is my rant. The first step in the process of not being racist is understanding that you are, even if you don't think you are, and then making a conscious effort to undo your unconscious impulses that have been programmed into you. And so I feel like
Implicit bias.
Yeah, your implicit bias. So I felt like it's going to be the same thing when I took this fascist test, that I was going to score much higher than I wished I would, and that I need to simply consciously be aware to undo the things that are inherent in me. But I don't remember what my score was, honestly.
I know Jeremy scored pretty low, like I did.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, Jeremy scoring low does not surprise me. As a
Did
person,
you take one, Ashley?
No, I didn't take
now
it.
she's going to after, though.
Yeah, I am.
Have you
As a-
guys ever taken any of the implicit bias tests? I think
I have.
Have you? Is it Harvard
I had my
University?
students take it. I had my students take it. So one of the conditions I had my
Those are
students
really interesting. Those are
because it's about
very
your reaction
interesting.
time. Yeah, it's
Yes.
about reaction time. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the ones that was most interesting when because I had students take it, but there's like 20 of them now you can take on like gender, on LGBT, on race, on whatever.
Religion.
And I had my students take it, and I said, look, you don't have to tell me the results. You can take any one you want tonight as homework, but just come back, and if you want to say which one you took, great. If not, no worries. But talk about what you thought of the test and what you thought of your results. And one of the ones that's always stuck with me is I had an African American student who, on a whim, took the one about African Americans, and he came back as being biased against African Americans. And he's like, I don't think the test is right. How could I be a black person and be racist against black people? And one of the other students said, well, you've been watching the same TV I have. And I remember thinking like, and the student was like, that's like, he didn't totally concede the point, but he was definitely thought it was an interesting point. And I think that was the thing that I really took away from that test, was just like, it doesn't just program, the world doesn't just program me, it programs the very people that it's programming me to have biases against.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
And the point of those tests is not to really call people out on being racist or bigoted in any way. It's
No,
merely
just to be aware of it.
Draw awareness to things you may not
Right.
be conscious of. Yeah.
Right.
And I think that
But
the
certainly-
F-scale test probably needs to be approached with the same grain of salt.
Yes, but I also think, and I assume this is why the author wrote this story or submitted it now. I certainly know it's part of the reason why I published it now, was because and I don't think this is a stretch, like I see some of those tendencies coming out in not just America, but in the world, where people talk in absolutes, and and you hear people like the thing. This one's far enough in the past now. Hopefully, it's not like a triggering thing. The idea that people thought that Hillary Clinton was running a like a child slave labor camp through a pizza shop.
You haven't
Like-
been reading the American news, have you? It's
Like-
still around.
That story's still going around? Yeah.
It's
like,
actually worse now. It's worse.
that is the most absurd. Like that is the most
Yeah.
absurd thing I've. The fact that it's through a pizza shop. If you could just stop there. Like nothing nefarious gets run through a pizza shop except laundering money. But it makes me realize that like a charismatic leader, and I don't think we have a charismatic leader now, but a charismatic leader that had these tendencies could comfortably get 30% of America, or any country probably, to go along with any statement. Any statement.
That's one of the statements on the F scale test that I took was all we need is a few charismatic and devoted leaders
Yeah, I remember that question.
to lead our country. We need that more than we need laws or social programs.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
I was
do you
definitely
remember that
not
question?
a fan of that question.
I was.
I
not a
remember
fan
saying
of that question
absolutely
either.
no.
Yeah, me too. But I thought that was interesting
So-
that was a question.
So if we agree that these tests have some validity to some realm, either this specific test or the
Yeah.
biases test, should we have our leaders publish their results or take these tests? Is it something that we need to put more value in?
Yeah.
I don't know
I-
about
I-
that.
I think we
No?
just need to be educated. I think you just need to be educated about your implicit bias, about your tendencies, about the tendencies of humanity. I mean, I'm again, this is my own bias. I think that information is truthful information is almost always good. Truthful thought is almost always helpful. Truthful conversations, even if they're conversations where you're wrong, like, are almost always good. And that
Sure.
while there's a lot of sort of bubbling and error that comes up in that process, it tends to be a good thing, as opposed to like a really charismatic leader who wants to sway people and sway public opinion. It just that works great if they happen to be right, but it works so badly when they happen to be wrong. I don't know. Sorry, that's my little soapbox.
We're
Yeah.
on a rant and on a soapbox today.
At the same time,
At the
yeah.
same time.
I
It's a
get.
doubler.
I found this story super interesting, because I think that there are more Jeffreys in the world than I think maybe you guys think there are.
Oh
I
no,
think-
I think the world is full of Jeffreys.
Yeah, I think like if you were to go to any bar in any college town on any day, you would find guys who not maybe as purposefully or intelligently as Jeffrey's doing it, but that have an inherent understanding at some sort of subconscious level that they know who to approach and who not to.
Oh, absolutely. Oh,
That
thank
they
you.
Yes.
they just through years of practice they can spot it, and they don't even know they are spotting it.
For sure.
I've had this stupid games played on me.
Yeah.
All the time. I'm like, oh, this is what you're going
Right.
to do. You're going to try to trick me into playing some stupid game
Right.
to show how intelligent you are, or how you
Right.
have control over my mind. I was like, no.
But I think, but my point is, I don't think that just.
you need to go away.
I don't think that just happens in bars. I think that happens in Boy Scout troops where there's a troop leader that just sees, or coaching, or churches, or non-profit, like all these places where there are people that have many people that they interact with. They inherently are picking people, right? And I think I think is far more common than like Jeffrey's a bad example. He seems like a bad person in this. I think he is probably more common than not.
So put it this way, we tend to praise those people because they do a better outreach. That guy can get any girl in the bar, always ends up with a girl, or that church leader seems to really hit home with everybody and connects with them more than other people. Or, you kind of fall under their spell in a way. I think we tend to praise those types of people.
And elevate those people. I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, it's not a coincidence that Bill Clinton is both a charismatic political leader with the public, and he is a charismatic leader with his intern, right? Those skills are very transferable. And I think that's...
we got to pick up artists with this story. But now that we've gone all the way around in this circle, I can totally believe we've gotten to pick up artists with this story. Wow.
I actually read it that way almost the entire time. I was like, oh, yeah, no, I've had interactions with Jeffrey in bars before.
I mean,
I
but
didn't
I think
about that.
I mean, but it also, I think that pickup artist thing is just another version of the tools that sort of fascism uses, right? It's just another manifestation of the same process.
I think that's a good point.
So what do we need to do is we just need to be aware as that there are people that might try to...
In a perfect world, have good self-esteem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing about these kinds of tests is not that our leaders are taking them, but that us as individuals who are consumers of information are taking them. So that we know what the dog whistles are.
Right.
We know what to listen for and be like, oh, hey, you know what? That's a super tempting statement that person just made. Why is that tempting to me? Like,
that statement feels really good, right?
Yeah.
Why does it feel really good?
Because it, like, strokes my ego while putting someone else down. Like, you have to be aware of those things. So I think that's the purpose of these tests. It's not necessarily to, like, weed out bad leaders, but to help us be better citizens.
Yeah.
You know, like, really evaluate yourself.
Yeah. All right. So you've been listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. Please like and subscribe. Please support us on Patreon if you're able to. That's always a great way to do it.
Subscribe to the magazine. You get short stories every month.
What's the website, Ashley?
AfterDinnerConversation.com.
There you go. Yes, and you can read us, subscribe to the magazine on most of the sort of handheld phone, tablet, e-readers now. So just do a quick search. Thank you, and thank you for joining us, Sarah. And
thank you for having me.
Screw that, Jeremy. We like
he's all right. No,
we like you better. You're fun.
I'm not gonna tell him you said that.
Okay.
He's just gonna watch this. He'll know you said it.
Yeah, it's true. Are you kidding? He doesn't listen to these. All right, I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this, please like and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. You know, the vast majority of people haven't liked and subscribed, which means maybe it shows up in your algorithm, maybe it doesn't. So don't leave that to chance. Just go ahead and hit that button, and we'd sure appreciate that. And that way we can keep doing what we're doing, and you're not left to the whims of some algorithm. Thanks.